Denver Broncos head coach Nathaniel Hackett outlined what he and his staff have identified the Broncos need to do better going forward after 5 weeks of action. Plus, Justin Simmons and 2 other key players are set to return off injured reserve. And the Broncos made some corresponding roster moves, including bringing in not 1, but 2 long snappers. What do we have to break down from Tuesday's practice in Dove Valley? You get that and much more on today's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos.
You are Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, Broncos country? Welcome into a brand new episode, Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much to everybody in Broncos country for tuning in and making Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day, free and available everywhere you get your podcasts in audio format, or whether you watch us on YouTube. Do us a favor, if you have not done so already, hit that subscribe or that follow button so you never miss out on a day's worth of Denver Broncos news, content coverage every single day, all year long. From the South Stands to the end zone, I'm your host, as always, Cody Roark, Broncos reporter for Mile High Sports. Not having my co-host, Sarah Bender. He's a site expert, predominantlyorange.com. He's moving into his brand new house. He'll rejoin us a little bit later on this week here, Locked On Broncos, as Denver prepares to take on the Los Angeles Chargers. But on today's episode of the show, the Broncos were back on the practice field at the UCL Training Center on Tuesday, and they got some good news with the return of several key players that look to be ready to play this upcoming week on Monday Night Football. And on top of that, what's going on with the offense? Broncos head coach Nathaniel Hackett and his coaching staff have been able to meet together to figure out through 5 games what's gone wrong with the offense. How can they fix it? We'll play a little bit from what Nathaniel Hackett had to say to us today in the media overall for this Broncos football team. So let's dive into it. The Broncos offense against the Los Angeles Chargers, they are aiming to get back on track. And you know what, folks? It is easier said than done, because I think you and I collectively, and Sarah, we can look at what's going on with the Broncos offense and say, well, they need to do this better. But I think the one process that we sometimes get so caught up in trying to overanalyze or microanalyze is how do they do it? What are the action-based items that they have to do? And there really is no Band-Aid solution. I mean, for the Broncos offense in general, we know they have to be better on first down. That's something that Nathaniel Hackett said is absolutely critical for them. Another thing that stands out to us that watch and cover the team, and for you, the fans that watch at home or attend games and watch, it's just the offense just is so out of sync at times. They go backwards a lot. They're dealing with getting sacked, going backwards due to a penalty, tackle for a loss, and they're finding themselves in inopportune long field situations, and then the execution is falling apart. They're having breakdowns on the offensive line on the right side right now. I mean, there is a multitude of things, but you know what? The Broncos can't just say, you know what? Things haven't been going the way that we've planned for the first 5 weeks. Let's throw our hands in the air. We might as well give up. That's not the mentality of the players or the coaches. And I can tell you this as somebody who's in Dove Valley at practice almost every other day of the week, covering the team, talking to players and coaches. They're still grinding. They're still trying to figure it out. They want to get the offense back on track, and that has been one of the keys. So let's go to Broncos head coach Nathaniel Hackett, who met with the media on Tuesday. And one of the questions he was asked is, with this opportunity to have a little bit of time in between games from Thursday night to next Monday against the Los Angeles Chargers, how have you and your coaching staff kind of met together and kind of figured out what's going on with the offense? How can we get it right? And a lot of it is with addressing some of the issues the Broncos are facing on first down, going backwards, long field situations. Here's what Broncos head coach Nathaniel Hackett had to say.
Negative plays. I think that's been kind of one of our nemesises. We've been really good in some explosive passes down the field. I think we're pretty high up there in the league, and we have some really good explosive. We're really feast or famine, and it's in the red zone, and it's in the middle of the field. The amount of get back on tracks we have is just too difficult. We need to be way more efficient on first down, getting positive yards, and even just incompletions instead of sacks or penalties. So I think those are the things that we're focusing on, trying to narrow down the things that we want to be great at and then continually develop in those.
That's certainly been the thing. I mean, he even said it as well. Dire straits in the sense that the Broncos just continuously put themselves in long field positions. And it's tough to overcome, because I'll tell you this from the mind of somebody who's been a defensive coordinator, who's played defense. If you are playing defense, and especially it's amplified at the NFL level, if the offense that you're going against is facing, let's say, a 2nd and 17 or a 3rd and 15, it allows us to just play back, right? We're going to play off coverage, and we're going to force the offense to throw the ball short. We're going to rally and tackle, force them to punt, or force them to try to kick a long field goal. That's how it plays. And for Denver, I mean, they found themselves in these situations so often this season. It's frustrating. Players are frustrated by it. I thought Dalton Risner had a lot of great things to say on Tuesday, that it's on all 11 of us. It's not just on the quarterback. It's not just on the right tackle or the left guard or the center or the wide receiver. He says it's on 11 players altogether, buying in collectively to what the coaching staff has to say and going out there and executing and doing our job. And as cliche as it sounds, I mean, he is spot on. That is what you can do. And that's all the Broncos can focus on doing. Now, there's another part of the offense we've talked about this week as well here on Lockdown Broncos, is really the buildup with being able to take the pressure off Russell Wilson as he's dealing with the shoulder injury right now. How can the Broncos offense get things going? How can they get back on track? You know what one of the bigger keys is? It's getting the run game going. And now this week, look, we saw Melvin Gordon. We saw Mike Boone get things going a little bit as well, especially Boone in the fourth quarter against the Colts. Now you add Latavius Murray, who's 6'3", has some size as a downhill runner, to the mix for this Broncos offense. I asked Broncos head coach Nathaniel Hackett, from his standpoint, going forward, will we see all three running backs, Melvin Gordon, Latavius Murray, Mike Boone, will we see them get their hands on the ball for the rest of the way down the stretch with a true by-committee approach? Here's what he had to say.
I've kind of talked about it in the past. I think that with so many games and how violent this game is, the more backs you can have touch the ball and have fresh legs be out there is always good. And, we're going to get to know Latavius here. So you've known him for a long time, and I know he's a downhill runner. He can do a lot of different things. He's a very experienced back. So is Melvin. And then Boone, you saw him come on last game quite a bit. So all three of those guys, you want to see them have the ball in their hands at some point.
The physicality side of the NFL is something that is very evident, especially when it comes to the running back position. We talk about linebacker as well. I think that Denver going with a true committee approach, my personal experience, I feel like would be beneficial to take that pressure off the offense, because you don't want to be a two-pass-happy offense. I don't know if any of you had a chance to catch the Tampa Bay Buccaneers game this past week. They had a 21-point lead against the Falcons, and they were still throwing the ball. At halftime, Tom Brady threw the ball 30 times, and by the end of the game, he had 49 total, 50 passing attempts, and they almost lost that game because they did not run the football. And I think that the really good teams we're seeing in the NFL right now, they have a really good defense, which I think Denver does. They have a good offensive line, which Denver right now is not there. I mean, they got injuries to key guys there. We'll see if the O-line changes with Calvin Anderson, Billy Turner, Quinn Miners potentially returning. The O-line could look a lot different, and maybe it could be even better. But they also can run the football really well, and I think Denver has all the talent, all the players that can run the football effectively. Can they do it? It's a matter of execution, and that'll be a big question mark for the rest of the way here for this Broncos football team. Can they get it going? Can they get it going against a Los Angeles Chargers team on Monday Night Football? That is the million-dollar question heading into this week's matchup, Week 6, for your Denver Broncos. We'll have you covered here, Lockdown Broncos, every single day, all year long. You know we have you covered. Outside of that, though, Broncos country coming up here in just one moment. The Broncos, they activated 3 players off of injured reserve, in a sense they're designating them to return, not officially off of injured reserve just yet. But how might the return of Justin Simmons boost the defense? How might the addition of Greg Dulcich give the Broncos offense a little bit of boost? And will Michael Ojemudia start opposite of Patrick Surtain at cornerback? We dive into that coming up here in just a moment. But before we do that, let me tell you about Tommy John, the sponsor of today's episode, Lockdown Broncos. And fall is chaos in your pants. You're overheating one second, you're freezing the next. To be ready for anything, you need underwear that can handle everything. And it's time for Tommy John underwear. Yes, in Tommy John underwear, you're that much more comfortable, so you can do everything better. And one of the things I like too, especially with underwear, sometimes you run into brands that make it, they ride. They're very tight. They're very uncomfortable. You don't get a lot of breathing room. Well, here's the thing. With Tommy John, they have breathable, lightweight fabric that has 4 times the stretch of competing brands. They come with a no wedgie guarantee thanks to a non-rolling waistband and legs that never ride up. Plus, they feature a horizontal quick draw fly. Plus, a hammock pouch supports and stops the awkward swing and slap, giving everyone something to be grateful for. And with over 17 million pairs sold, people love Tommy John underwear. That's why Tommy John doesn't have customers. They have fanatics. So go to TommyJohn.com/lockedon right now for 20% off your first order. 20% off at TommyJohn.com/lockedon. TommyJohn.com/lockedon. See site for details. As we continue on today's episode, Lockdown Broncos, the Broncos looking to get a boost from the injury side with some reinforcements coming off as the Broncos have officially activated the window to return for Justin Simmons, Greg Dulcich, and Michael Ojemudia. Thank you so much, Broncos country, for tuning in and making Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day, free and available everywhere you get your podcasts in audio format, not to mention watching us on YouTube as well. Do us a favor, hit that subscribe to that follow button so you never miss out on a day's worth of Denver Broncos news, content, coverage, and more. Let's get to some good news now because it's been very gloomy so far despite a 2-3 start. I think for Broncos country, there's a lot of concerns that fans have, and rightfully so. But you know what? We're here to provide logic along the way. It's good news that the Broncos are going to be getting a couple of players back from injury. Now, Justin Simmons being the biggest one is going to add a tremendous boost to the defense that I think for all of us collectively, when he went down with the injury and he was on injured reserve short term, the biggest question from Broncos country was, can the Broncos defense maintain its poise without a guy like Justin Simmons? And at the time, Josey Jewell was there. Josey's probably going to be unlikely this week for Monday Night Football, but Justin Simmons does return on the back end, which prompts a lot of questions. What do you do with Caden Stearns? We addressed that on a previous episode, Locked On Broncos this week. Make sure you go and you check that out here. But on Tuesday, the Broncos officially designated Justin Simmons, Greg Dulcich, and Michael Ojemudia to return. Now, what this does is this activates a 21-day window where the Broncos can have to elevate them, or can. I mean, they don't have to, but they can elevate them to the 53-man roster. But if they don't elevate any of these players to the 53-man roster within this 21-day window, those players, or that player specifically, will have to be on injured reserve for the remainder of the season and cannot play. The expectation right now for the Broncos is that they will bring Justin Simmons, Greg Dulcich, and Michael Ojemudia up to the 53-man roster. And as it stands right now, they can do just that because the Broncos roster currently sits at 50 total players after some of the moves that have happened on Tuesday. We'll address that a little bit later on. And Michael Ojemudia, Justin Simmons, Greg Dulcich, these three players are expected to fulfill those 53-man roster spots here. And I know you're wondering, what does that mean about long snapper? Don't they have to have a long snapper on the active roster? They do not. We'll tell you why here in a little bit here on Locked On Broncos. But I will say the good news for Denver, being at practice on Tuesday, Justin Simmons was back out there. Greg Dulcich was back out there. Michael Ojemudia was back out there alongside P.J. Locke, who was back in action after missing last week due to a concussion that he sustained in Week 4 against the Las Vegas Raiders. So the Broncos getting some guys back healthy on the defensive side of the ball, which is always good to see. The offensive side, you know, you wish you could get guys like Garrett Bowles, Tim Patrick, Javonte Williams back from the injuries that they have. Those are major injuries to them, and now other guys have to step up. But we can talk about this. Let's first look at defense. Justin Simmons returns on the back end of the secondary as a team captain, as a guy who's going to coordinate and get the defense lined up and execute things that Ejiro Evero wants. I mean, it's great to get his presence back there on the football field. Now, I think when you look at a guy like Michael Ojemudia, the bigger question here that Broncos fans have is he going to be in line to start opposite of Patrick Surtain, or is that going to be rookie cornerback Damarri Mathis? And as it stands right now, I think we've seen when Damarri Mathis' number has been called upon by Ejiro Evero and the Broncos defense, they've been able to get success. They've been able to have some good plays from Damarri Mathis. Now, I'd say more recently against the Colts, he had a couple of missed tackles. That's something he's going to obviously have to improve on. But ultimately, Damarri Mathis has done a really good job filling in for the Broncos opposite of Patrick Surtain, or, in the one game where he had to come in for Patrick Surtain opposite of Ronald Darby. Now that Ronald Darby is out for the season, Denver has some options. I think with the return of Michael Ojemudia, I want to go back here for Broncos country and pinpoint in training camp and OTAs and in the preseason. He was in line for a very prominent role within the Broncos defense that allowed them to get very creative with their personnel. And I'm talking where you can see Patrick Surtain line up maybe inside the slot there. We were seeing some things like that. And a lot of it's going to have to be, can Michael Ojemudia come back from this elbow injury? He's going to be wearing a brace from it, but can he come back and pick up and maybe kind of carry off on the end of last season? Now, his last on-field product against the Buffalo Bills in the preseason, he struggled, and he had a rough game, and everybody in Broncos country remembers that. But I do want to throw caution to the wind here, folks. Granted, he didn't play well in the preseason. He ended up getting hurt in that game. We have seen what Michael Ojemudia can do for this Broncos team, and I'm optimistic as well that they will utilize him. Now, if they were to bring him, in a sense, they have to do some roster shuffling. What does it mean at cornerback, right? Because guys like Asang Bassi have stepped up and have been playing a key role on special teams. Bassi's more of a nickel guy. But what about Darius Phillips, who the Broncos had signed to the 53-man roster initially after Michael Ojemudia's injury? We have yet to see him play a single down for the Broncos defensively. He's been dealing with a hamstring injury since being signed. Denver could look to maybe release him depending on what other roster moves they have to make coming up here in the next couple of weeks to bring certain guys back. I mean, there's so much roster flexibility and some of the gymnastics that George Paton has to do. I'm not envious of him having to do that. But that is something to keep an eye on here as it pertains to Michael Ojemudia and Damarri Mathis, something to watch in the next couple of weeks. Who's going to get the start at cornerback? Will they change things up? How will they maneuver personnel and what have you not there? So something to keep an eye on. But for Greg Dulcich, I think this is one that Broncos country is really wondering about. What can he add to the offense, which is very hard to say right now because we haven't seen him play. We've seen him in OTAs. He looked really good in OTAs. I will throw that out there. We didn't get to see him play in the preseason because he was dealing with a hamstring injury. We got to see him in little bits and tiny pieces through a couple of days of training camp where he caught a red zone touchdown from Russell Wilson. But I will tell you this is what Greg Dulcich can add to the Broncos offense that they haven't had so far. And I think that's just spacing options because he's 6'4". You can line him up in the slot. You can line him up on the outside. How great of a blocker is he? I don't know if he's necessarily going to be a great blocker against a guy like Khalil Mack, but I think that he can have a sizable advantage blocking, a nickel defender or a cornerback or a safety. I think he's better suited there. But, I mean, he has shown in his college tape at UCLA, it doesn't matter if you're running man coverage or zone coverage. Greg Dulcich knows how to attack the soft spots. He knows how to get open, and he's got some deceptive speed as well. And I think that the Broncos can utilize that. And it'll be very interesting to see how Nathaniel Hackett brings him along the way. I mean, right now it's a huge question mark. We have no idea what we're going to see from Greg Dulcich, but I do think that he can add some value in the size department in the receiving game that the Broncos don't have outside of Cortland Sutton. So that is something to keep an eye on here if you are a member of Broncos Country. But Broncos Country coming up here in just a moment. We're going to go over some of the Tuesday's roster moves that the Broncos made to create some roster flexibility. We mentioned the roster now sits at 50 total players. They released a key player from the 53-man roster who stepped up last week for them against the Colts, and they also have brought on not one, but two long snappers. What can we read into that? We'll dive into that coming up here in just a moment. But before we do that, let me tell you about BetOnline.net, the sponsor of today's episode. Locked On Broncos, BetOnline.net is your number one source for football betting info this season. You can find all the latest player developments, team matchups, news, podcasts, and in-depth articles and analysis on every game that you can find. And as always, BetOnline remains your continued source for all your sport wagering information with live betting and up-to-the-minute scores for every sport out there. They're the fastest, the easiest way to check in on all your favorite games and events, including MLB, MMA, boxing, and golf. So head to betonline.net or use your mobile device to learn more today. BetOnline, where the game starts. As we jump into the fourth quarter action on today's episode, Locked On Broncos will highlight some of the roster moves the Broncos made on Tuesday, just about 6.5 days away from Monday Night Football, a primetime showdown with the Los Angeles Chargers. Just a reminder, we will have here on the Locked On Broncos podcast a crossover episode with Locked On Chargers to preview Monday's primetime action. Thank you so much, Broncos Country, for tuning in, making Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day on your favorite audio podcasting platform or whether you watch on YouTube. We appreciate you so much. My co-host, Sarah Bettinger, will rejoin me once he gets settled into his new home that he moved into. No more Dexter setup, no more tarp behind him that so many of you in the YouTube comment section have been giving him a hard time for. He's got to get his internet set up, but I'm looking forward to having Sarah rejoin me here very soon on Locked On Broncos. But on Tuesday, the Broncos were busy making some moves. They've been holding tryouts the last couple of days for long snappers, obviously with Jacob Bobenmoyer going down with an injury, having some surgery. I believe it was on his thumb area initially, so now that means the Broncos have a need for a new long snapper. Well, before we get into the long snapper portion of there, the Broncos did release a player from the 53-man roster, and that was outside linebacker Jonathan Kongbo, who stepped up after Aaron Patrick went down with a concussion, was not able to play against the Indianapolis Colts. I think the expectation is that he could be back this week. Also, Jonathan Cooper, outside linebacker, could be back as well as he's been dealing with a hamstring injury. Alongside Baron Brownie, you have him, Bradley Chubb, and Nick Bonito. I mean, the Broncos right now have good depth at outside linebacker. So Kongbo was released, which did bring the Broncos roster, the 53-man roster, all the way to 50, which, as we talked about a little bit earlier, it is expected that Justin Simmons, Greg Dulcich, Michael Ojemudia will get those final three 53-man roster spots coming forward. But I don't think this spells the end of the road here for Kongbo. I think that what we saw against the Colts, he's got some athleticism to him. He's got freakish size, and I'm more than likely he's going to be brought back onto the Broncos practice squad if, in fact, he does clear waivers. So that will be something to monitor here in the next day or two for your Denver Broncos. They do not practice on Wednesday. They'll be back at practice on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday before heading to LA on Sunday, and then they play on Monday. So they were back on the field on Tuesday. Wednesday's an off day. They'll be at the team facility going through meetings, film, position groups, recovery, treatment, and everything that they go through in their day-to-day. So something to keep an eye on there. They also released 2 other players from the practice squad. The Broncos have a richment of depth, really, when it comes to the wide receiver position. They have 7 wide receivers right now on the active roster, with Kendall Hinton being elevated a couple of days ago to the 53 there. And they also signed Trinity Benson, former beloved Broncos fan favorite, to the practice squad. And in return, Denver's had to make some moves because of the need with long snapper. They released 2 wide receivers. They released Darius Shepard, the speedster that came out of Green Bay, that had a couple of nice plays in training camp for the Broncos. And they also released Vincent Smith, who was signed to the practice squad as well. Both players are off the practice squad as it stands right now. There is a chance that here in a little bit of time's worth, those guys will come back. I don't know if it's going to be this week, though, because of what we're going to get into right now, and that is because long snappers are people too. The Broncos have signed 2 long snappers to their practice squad, and a lot of it is going to be predicated off of being able to compete all week long to see who gets elevated for Monday's game. And I imagine probably on Friday we'll find out. We might see another roster move where we'll figure out, okay, hey, this guy is going to be the long snapper. The other guy will get released, and then the Broncos can bring one of these other wide receivers that they released back onto the practice squad. But they signed Mitchell Fabroni, one of the long snappers that is going to be competing to try to get a spot to start on Monday Night Football against the Chargers. Now, a little bit of background for him. Not a lot of NFL experiences, bounced around from NFL team to NFL team in a short span of time. More recently, spent time with the Houston Texans in 2021. But more recently, when we talk about football being played, he played for the Pittsburgh Maulers of the USFL just several months ago. So he is getting an opportunity to come in, compete for an NFL spot right now as Jacob Bobenmoyer recovers from surgery on a hand injury that he sustained in Thursday night's overtime loss to the Indianapolis Colts. He's one of those guys, and he will be competing with Joe Fortunato, who appeared in 1 game for the Green Bay Packers in 2021. So not a lot of experience here for these 2 long snappers as it pertains to the NFL level, and we've already addressed really the concern with seeing a brand new long snapper come in. This person has to be in accordance with the guys to the left of him, to the guys to the right of him, whether it's on punt or whether in a situation it's on field goal or extra point. There needs to be a resemblance of chemistry that is built there, or also the knowledge of doing your job there. Long snapper is not as easy as many people say, and you also have to have the chemistry to make sure, okay, what's the trajectory I'm getting this football to my holder so that the kicker can kick it. We've seen issues around the NFL with Cincinnati. We've seen it with some other teams around the NFL that have had issues with having a brand new long snapper. I think the Dallas Cowboys were one of them. Had a brand new long snapper come in, struggle, snap goes on the turf there, and all of a sudden you miss out on an extra point, or, it's turnover on downs. You simply can't have that, or it leads to bad snap where you have to get it, adjust. Sometimes the laces doesn't come out, and then you obviously have the kicker miss it. We saw that Jacob Bobenmoyer had one of those instances against the Las Vegas Raiders, but it wasn't an issue against the Indianapolis Colts. So 2 long snappers competing for a roster spot, and they'll practice all week long here. Like I said, Thursday and Friday. More than likely, the determination could be made during Saturday's practice walkthrough as to who will get the start. But that's why you have 2 practice squad guys, long snappers there. Now, the Broncos don't need to have a long snapper on the 53-man roster. What's going to happen in the situation is whoever wins the job this week in competition for the next 4 weeks as Jacob Bobenmoyer recovers, a lot of it's going to be they're going to stay on the practice squad and they're going to be elevated on game day. That's something that you can do under the new CBA, which I think gives you a lot of flexibility. So one of these guys will win the starting job. Who will it be? A lot remains to be determined. And I'll obviously ask Dwayne Stukes this week when we meet the media, what is he looking for in these long snappers who don't have as much experience, try to come in and try to fit in midway through the season. That's going to be a huge key to watch. Broncos country, just want to say thank you so much. As always, I appreciate you taking time out of your day to listen or to watch Locked On Broncos, making us your first listen every single day on your favorite audio podcasting platforms, or whether you watch on YouTube. Sarah Bettinger and myself will be back, but tomorrow's episode of Locked On Broncos, we're going to have an in-depth discussion with the Locked On Chargers guys to preview Monday's big primetime action on Monday Night Football. Justin Herbert, the Los Angeles Chargers, take on Russell Wilson and the Denver Broncos. We'll dive into that as well on tomorrow's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos.